We're here at the UN Climate Conference in Poland, and we're with Mariam Traore Chazalnoel, and she is with the International Organization for Migration. She works on environmental and climate issues. Thank you very much for being with us, Mariam.
Such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about what your organization does and why you do it?
So I work for International Organization for Migration. We are migration specialists. We work in migration management. But what we have seen in the past few years is that a lot of migration today is linked to climate change and environmental degradation. So we think that it's important to bring the migration perspective, stories, data, analysis to the climate change negotiations so that the countries who are party to the convention can actually try to do something about it.
Okay, and so speaking of climate and migration and the nexus between the two, what is the relationship between the two, and do you expect that climate is going to have a significant influence on migration?
Absolutely. What we already see is that climate change leads people to migrate away from their regions of origin. It can be because of the climate change impacts on natural disasters. So in some places you have millions of people who are displaced by floods or storms. I think last year it was something like 20 million of people across the world displaced because of a natural disaster. But what we also see and that we cannot quantify is people moving because they cannot sustain their livelihoods anymore. So here we're talking about fishermen in Senegal, for instance. They cannot fish anymore because the ocean resources have been depleted because of climate change. So what do? They migrate to a city because they try to find some new opportunities. But when you think of these migrants, you would think they're economic migrants. But in fact, the economic reason is linked to the climate change impacts.
So do you expect that more people will be migrating in the years to come as a result of this climate?
Yes, absolutely. There's been quite a lot of work done on projections. There's a World Bank study that was released a few months ago that predicts that more than 140 million people could be migrating by 2050 because of climate change impacts if nothing is being done. So that's why we're here at the COP, because climate change action, mitigation and adaptation means that people will probably not have to move as much in the future. But it's also important to remember that for some people it's already too late. We see it in some of the Pacific islands. People cannot stay where they are. So what do we do for these people? You have to help them move in a dignified way, in a safe way, help them find opportunities elsewhere.
So right now, even as we're standing here, they just finished, I think, a conference in Morocco about international migration. What can you tell us about that conference and the outcome and how it relates to this?
So the conference is ending tomorrow, but the document has been adopted. It's called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, the first United Nations agreement on international cooperation around migration. That was a really significant step for climate change and environmental migration issues. Why? Because this compact actually recognizes the need to address climate change drivers of migration. It's the first time that in the migration policy area, a global agreement says that this is an important matter and states need to do something about it. And there was also a large consensus around the need to take action in the future to help states who have to face these challenges, either because there are people migrating towards them or because they have people from their country who are forced to migrate because of climate impacts.
So as I'm sure you know, there was a lot of resistance to this, especially from certain Western countries, my country, the United States, and I guess at least, 12 countries pulled out. How is this kind of viewed within the UN system? What are people saying about these countries that have pulled out and refusing to participate?
I mean, some countries have pulled out, but what we think is that it's important to remember that 164 of them are still in. So that's still the vast majority of the countries, and it's enough to start meaningful action. The ones who are not here, it's their choice, their sovereign choice, but what we are looking forward to is to work with the ones who are in and want to work on climate migration issues.
And what do you think, and what do people in the UN think about some of the criticism? I know the U.S. government put out a statement saying that it globalizes immigration policy and that should be something for the nation states. Is there any validity to these criticisms, and what have people in the UN been saying?
So it's important to remember that the Global Compact is not a binding agreement, and its primary goal is to also respect the sovereignty of the states who agree to this compact. So the spirit of the negotiations was not at all to impose a limit on national sovereignty. It was to encourage a spirit of cooperation among states who have a stake in the migration debate.
And I'm sure you're from France. There's a lot of anti-migrant sentiment rising up. What is the International Organization for Migration doing about this, if anything, and what can we expect to see in the future?
So yes, we do. We have noticed, like anyone else, that there is a lot of anti-migrant sentiment around the world. So what we think here is that education is key, having the right narrative in the media, the right stories coming out, showing the facts and not just the perception. So there is indeed a lot of work to be done on that, and that I think should be a priority for the future.
And so one last question before I just open it up to you. There was a lot of talk in the Western media, and the Trump administration said this, that the UN is trying to make migration into a human right. Is migration a human right?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that, because from my organization perspective, we're not looking at the normative side of this debate. What we do now is that any of the migration action management solutions that you're looking at should be rooted in the human rights of people. We do have some international instruments that are applicable to all, including the Human Rights Convention. So this should be the guiding principles for any interventions, including on environmental and climate migration.
Very good. And what should Americans and people in Congress know about the work you guys are doing and the policies and agenda that you have?
I think what's important to know is that this is not just a discussion, it's a reality. It's about real people. You do have people right now in different parts of the world who are not able to stay where they are because of climate change impacts. The best thing we can do for them is to do something about climate change so that they can stay where they are. And it's also the wish of most of the migrants that we speak to. They do not want to get out of their communities, they don't want to leave their families, they want to stay where they are. But sometimes they are forced to go because the conditions have just changed so much that they cannot stay. So I think what's important to know is that there is still room to do something. There's room for action, but it needs to be now.